forward here. All right, I'm going to start over just briefly. My name is Patricia Teppenhart. I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce. I'm so thankful to have all of you with us this evening. As I've mentioned, we are holding this conversation in partnership with our friends and colleagues at the African American Chamber of Commerce of New Jersey. And we are thrilled to have a deep dive conversation around places our members can use their perspectives and their expertise to inform the important policy decisions that are being made throughout the state of New Jersey. So while it may seem odd that the chambers are having this conversation, I assure you it is strategic. And we're really thankful for Sam Parker for making herself accessible, not just for us to have this conversation at 9 o'clock this morning, but for insisting that we have this conversation at 6 o'clock at night. As we talk about being equitable, sometimes that means we have to transition our times of operation so that folks with different work schedules can be accommodated and join the conversation. And so Sam, thank you for practicing what you preach and encouraging us to have this 6 p.m. conversation. We had over 40 folks registered for this PM conversation. And as we know, schedules are what they are. And so this is why we're recording it, so that anyone who wanted to be here, but perhaps had a scheduling conflict and couldn't make it, will still be able to share the content with them. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Ferlanda Nixon from the African American Chamber of Commerce of New Jersey to give a brief welcome on their behalf.
Okay, great. Thank you, Patricia. Good evening, everyone. And as Patricia said, I am Ferlanda Fox Nixon, and I am the Chief of Policy and Government Affairs of the African American Chamber of Commerce of New Jersey. And I bring greetings on behalf of the Chamber's founder, President, and CEO, John Harmon. So as many of you know, the African American Chamber of Commerce of New Jersey is dedicated to economically empowering and sustaining Black communities and businesses through entrepreneurship and capitalistic initiatives throughout the state of New Jersey. Among our many goals, we seek to enhance our ability to be a critical source of information, inspiration, knowledge, and resources for the more than 70,000 Black-owned businesses and the more than 1.1 million Black residents throughout New Jersey. So today's webinar allows us to do just that, and sharing information on how to diversify viewpoints in multiple spheres of influence throughout our state government. We are delighted to co-host this webinar with the New Jersey State Chamber of Commerce, and we hope that you find the information shared here today valuable to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ferlanda, and thank you to all of our colleagues at the African American Chamber for joining us in these strategic conversations. We're thankful for your partnership and for the progress ahead of us. I'm going to read Sam's bio so I don't leave anything out, because Sam and I go way back, but the things that I know about her off the record are probably not things that I should share on a webinar at 6 o'clock at night when she works for the governor's office. So Sam Parker is an organizational development and political professional with extensive expertise in strategic planning, leadership management, civic engagement, and collaborative partnership building. She's currently the Director of Appointments for Governor Murphy. Before joining the administration in March of 2021, Sam served as the Development and Political Affairs, as the Director of Development. I think I edited this wrong, Sam. Development and Political Affairs for the Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide. Sam has worked on congressional and partisan political campaigns for organizations such as the National LGBTQ Task Force, the Human Rights Campaign, Equality Maine, and Equality North Carolina, on LGBT+ issues all over the country. She holds a master's degree in public policy and management and a certificate of social justice and economics from the Muskie School at the University of Southern Maine. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sam.
Hi, everyone. I unmuted myself this time because I think when I joined the chat, the Zoom originally, I hadn't. Thank you for that warm welcome, Patricia and Ferlanda. I'm so grateful to both of your chambers for allowing us this opportunity to have a conversation. I'm also going to say, different than 9 o'clock this morning, my 70-pound pit bull is right next to me and keeps putting her paws on my leg. So if you see me rocking back and forth, it's all her. So I apologize for that. And also, as pandemic times, we're all still in our homes a little bit, welcome into my home, and hopefully she doesn't bark. That's where we're at. So as Patricia mentioned, I am the director of appointments for Governor Murphy. I also am an 18-year campaign veteran working on LGBT campaigns all across the country, not only for marriage, but for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, et cetera. At some point, there was a moment where I knew that the Supreme Court we were going to pass marriage and win. And so I needed to diversify so I could keep a job. And I got back into partisan politics. So here we are. Recently, I was the Development and Political Affairs Director at the Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide. A lot of my work, I think, oh my God, I'm so sorry, guys. She's like sitting on my leg. It's like not a good look. A lot of my work has me rooted a lot in advocacy. And so I do think that is something I bring to this role because it's necessary. And why is it necessary? I don't think it is a surprise that currently our boards could be better at matching the diversity and equity of our state. When I talk about diversity, I also think it's really important to mention I'm not just talking about race and ethnicity. We're talking about gender identity, sexual orientation. We're talking about military experience. We're talking about folks with disabilities as well as caretakers of folks with disabilities. When we talk about who we are interested in, when we are talking about these boards and commissions, please know that we are not just looking for folks who have college educations, although I'm aware that if you're involved with your chamber, more than likely your college, your education level is probably college or above, but we are looking at everybody. And I'm having this conversation with you tonight because not only do I hope and encourage you to apply for boards, I hope you think about those that you have in your networks, right? Those in your communities who you think would be good advocates. Because again, we need the experience that folks have are valid, whether they are live in urban areas, rural areas. And I know I mentioned diversity before, but I also think in the state of New Jersey, we have another interesting piece here, which is geographic diversity. We need to make sure that our boards are not just rooted in the North or the South. And I apologize, the chief of staff is texting me, so I just had to make sure that I didn't have to do anything. So I apologize for that. There are only two people that I will pretty much ignore everybody for, and it's our chief of staff and Gov. So my apologies, but geographic diversity is incredibly important. So what are we doing tonight? Well, first, I just want to introduce myself. I know that you heard my bio, but I do think that there is an interesting piece here, especially with the COVID pandemic and quarantining where we're in each other's homes, right? Is that we get to know each other as people, as humans, right? So I am a native of New Jersey. I grew up in Bergen County. I currently live in Monmouth County with my 4.5-year-old daughter, although she would probably prefer that I say that she is almost 5, and our 9-year-old pit bull who has vacated the dining room area. And so now I won't be struggling as much. So, lifelong New Jerseyan, I really truly love this state, and I'm so very honored that I get to work with individuals every day to move our state forward, especially when it comes to our boards and commissions. One thing I was tasked with when I first started really was bringing the advocate voice into the appointments process, as well as adding to the diversity. And I think it's important when we talk about DEI that we're really talking about DEIB, right? We're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I think that's a very valid component of this conversation because everybody's voice belongs on these boards and commissions. All right, so let's get to the nitty-gritty. Boards and commissions, how does it all happen? Well, everything starts with a recommendation that you peruse our website. So if you go to the appointments website, you are going to be able to see all the boards and commissions we have in the state. We have roughly 1,100 boards and commissions, and we're adding to them every day, especially with the legislature meeting, the governor signing off on bills, et cetera, and also signing off on executive orders. We always have new boards and commissions. Now, there is a slight caveat there, if you will. The other thing I was tasked with when I first started this job was updating our software. So the website is currently driven by the software that we have behind the scenes. Now, everybody knows if you're a data wonk, trash in is trash out. Now, this is also a database that we inherited from previous administrations. And this isn't a knock on administrations. I think it's a knock on human capacity, right? We don't have the most accurate information. We have done the best that we can in the last 4 years, 2 of which have been monopolized by the pandemic. And so obviously our focus was there. And so we are still doing that work to make sure with our departments and with the commissions themselves to see where folks are at. So that is just a small caveat to say, if you're looking at a board and commission on something that you are passionate about and there are no vacancies, there might be a vacancy. So if you're going to reach out to me, please indicate your interest, regardless of whether or not you see a vacancy, because there could be one. And if it's something that, if it's your number one choice, why miss out on it for a potential error in our system? So that's the first thing. Look at our website. The second thing is, it starts with a resume. You'll send a resume to appointments@nj.gov. And that's a special thing. And I think Patricia's going to throw that in the chat box for you. But that's a real special thing for everybody that is a part of these appointment town halls. So I did about 8 of them in October because one thing I recognized about this department when I started is that there was absolutely very little transparency about what this department does. When I was telling friends that I was hired as the appointments director, they were like, that's great. Where's Gov having dinner tonight? And I was like, ooh, not that kind of appointment. But he has a whole team of people. They're incredible to do his scheduling. That's not what I do. So there is this veil of mystery that is kind of erroneously surrounding this department. So I think I have a really good reputation for transparency and being direct, and also accountability. So that's part of why when Patricia and I were talking, I was like, yes, 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 let's do this. Because again, the more people that know what we do and are educated in the process, the less it is to become frustrated by it. So you'll submit your resume. Those who aren't a part of town halls, they'll apply through the website. But again, if you are giving this information to somebody in your network or your communities, please don't hesitate. The appointments@nj.gov is not a secret. It's just something so that we can kind of gauge who's applying from our town halls that we have. So appointments@nj.gov, you'll send your resume. What will follow is one of my colleagues. I have 4 incredible staffers who I work with. We are an incredible team. We'll respond to you with a questionnaire. Now, some transparency about the questionnaire. I like to joke that the questionnaire is kind of like a dating game, right? You want to know who you're inviting to dinner. And so it's going to ask you a lot of questions. One, because if you are applying to an advice and consent position, which we'll discuss later, knowing where you live, what county you are, which is like the first page of the questionnaire, it's helpful for us so we know which senators we're going to have to be working with and which you're going to be working with. So that's the first thing. But there are also questions about your finances. Now, I know ancestrally, there are a lot of issues around finances regarding shame and judgment. I want to be very clear here that there is nothing you could disclose in regards to your finances, as long as you are honest, that would preclude you from an appointment. Okay, now some of our boards and commissions do have a financial disclosure. And so if that is something you're uncomfortable with, I would maybe not apply to boards that have financial disclosures. But the other side of this is, unless you are somebody who has embezzled millions of dollars, which I imagine this group is not, more than likely you're going to be fine. We just want to know your background. It's going to ask you some other questions about why you are interested in the boards, how long you've lived in New Jersey, a little bit about your household. And the other thing that the questionnaire is going to ask is it has a self-identification part. Now, the reason we do this is, as we've mentioned, we want to make sure that we are the boards and commissions that we're appointing, that we can recognize our diversity, know who our applicant pool is. I am also a major data nerd. And so that information helps me demographically. As I mentioned before, we're not just looking at race and ethnicity. All those components that I mentioned earlier are on the self-identification section. And to be clear, there are prefer not to answer choices as a choice, right? So you could decide not to answer. We ask that you consider whatever information you are comfortable with that you give to us. After you complete the questionnaire, you'll send it back to us. And this is where your piece pauses. And I say pause because we get hundreds of applicants every day, not just to our inbox, but also through the website. And so it's a capacity issue. I know we've all been in a situation where maybe we've applied to a job that we really, really wanted, and the pool was just so busy that you got a response saying, we'll be in touch if we're interested. That is kind of the same situation here. Unfortunately, due to capacity, I wish that we could reach out to every single person and let them know a minute-by-minute update of where their application stands. But unfortunately, we just don't have the bandwidth, and it's just not a good use of our resources. However, I go through those pool of applicants regularly and try to piece out where folks can fit. All right, so that's the first piece. That's where it pauses. Now, if we are going to move forward with somebody on a board, they will go through a vetting process. Now, we don't utilize the state police. It is an in-department, in-house background check. I also want to be clear here. You can be spicy about the governor. However, you cannot call the governor names and expect to be on a board. I think that's common courtesy, right? So if you are on the record slamming the governor, maybe a board or commission is not the best place for you to give on the state level is not the best place. I'm not saying that we won't do it. I'm just saying that the potential there is not as great. And that's not to say that we want yes people. We don't want yes people, but I think it's about appropriate responses and how we communicate things. So that's just a note there. So and there are other things that we look into. So once the background check comes back, it either comes back qualified or not qualified. If it comes back not qualified, your application isn't going to move. I also want to be clear because I don't want this to be a reason why somebody doesn't apply on the off chance that they could come back not qualified and then feel as though their livelihood, their profession could be affected because of it. I am not interested in ruining anybody's livelihood. In fact, if you're taking the time to send a resume and to fill out a questionnaire, I very much respect you. And in fact, our background checks are confidential and they are locked for like 10 years. So nobody's going to know any reason. If for some reason you come back not qualified, nobody is ever going to know why. And if anybody ever asks me, and I have gone toe to toe with some senators who really want to know why the people that they recommended are not qualified, I just say, unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to disclose. However, we really appreciate anybody in the future that you'd like to consider. Okay, so I really want to be transparent about that. Now is the fun part. There are two types of appointments: direct and advice and consent. We are going to do direct first because it is the easiest, and then I'll delve into advice and consent. So direct, you have submitted your resume, you've submitted your questionnaire, you've gone through the background check and everything's come back great. And we have a board that we want to appoint you to, and it's a direct. I run it past our team of, I work with the deputy chiefs. I'll talk to the chief of staff. Ultimately, GUF will sign off on it. And then once it's approved, I submit it to the Secretary of State. It's filed, and ta-da, you're on a board. You will get a call from me letting you know that you have been appointed. You will also be told that you are going to get a letter in the mail. It's going to be confirmation of your appointment as well as an oath of office. You are going to sign that oath of office. You are going to notarize it. And then, most important of all, you are going to send it back to the Secretary of State's office. It doesn't get returned to me. What we do concurrently is we send a digitalized version of your appointments letter over to the Secretary of State. And once that happens, I'm sorry, not over to the Secretary of State, excuse me, we send a digitalized copy over to the specific board so that they know that you have been appointed and that they can begin the onboarding process, because we give them all your contact info. And after that, I'm out of it. It is between you and the board and those at will. All right. So that's the direct process, or the powers that be, I guess I should say there. So that's the direct process. Very easy. As opposed to advice and consent, which I think advice and consent, to be clear, it's at the advice and consent of the Senate. Okay. So I really want to be clear here that what the overall process of advice and consent is actually a check and balance on our government, right? So it's making sure that the governor can not just appoint at will who he wants, right? That we have to work with the legislature to make sure that everybody is involved in the process. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, because of this, we do hear a lot of there's political nepotism, you need to know somebody. That isn't true. If anything, I would love to have the conversation of civic engagement. If you are interested in a board or commission that is advice and consent, I would recommend starting out now, even pre you sending a resume, pre you starting the process, get to know your county senators. And what do I mean by county senators? I'm going to use my location as an example. So if I was looking to get onto a board that was advice and consent, I live in Monmouth County, I would be reaching out to Senator O'Scanlan and Senator Gopal. And what that would look like is I would give his office a call and I would say, hi, my name is Sam Parker. I live in Monmouth County. I'm your constituent. I'm interested in this position, this board or commission. I am starting the process with the appointments department. I hope that if I am chosen, that you'll give me courtesy to serve on this board. The other thing here is to say, and I'm more than happy to meet with you so that you can learn about my qualifications and get to know me. That's so important to start building those relationships. And if you know other individuals, right? Like if you maybe are not so politically involved, but you have other friends, ask them to make those connections, right? You all know how to network. It is the same here. So civic engagement. What is it now? How does this process work? Well, it still starts out the same. Resume, questionnaire, background check. We go through the whole, I talk to senior staff, the chief of staff and gov, we sign off, we nominate. All right, we nominate. What happens at that point is a couple of things. One, your resume will go over to the Senate Majority Office and they're going to send out, excuse me, they're going to send out another questionnaire, but you are also really good at questionnaires at this point, and they're very similar to ours. That truthfully, it's going to be a walk in the park for you. The difference between their questionnaire and our questionnaire is that you are going to notarize their questionnaire and send it back. I cannot tell you how many times I've had conversations with people where they'll be like, why isn't what, I got nominated a year ago. Why hasn't this moved through? I have all the sign-offs, and I have to respond to them and tell them they never filled out the questionnaire. And they go, no, that was part of the first steps. And I say, did you notarize it? Usually the answer is no. So that's a very important part. You're going to notarize their questionnaire, send it back. Once you do that, your resume and your questionnaire go out to your home county senators so that they know that you've been nominated and they have the interest. And it's at that point that they can decide to sign off or not. I'm going to be real with you. We're friends having a conversation. They could absolutely deny your courtesy because they want to. It is within the purview. We don't have any say over that. I wish we did, but we don't. Right? That's the whole advice and consent process. If we had say over it, it wouldn't be the advice and consent process. So that's why I really say, work with your home county senators, get to know them. Sometimes we are able to work with them, especially if there are things that they may want, right? There's a bit of politicking that goes on in my job. And that is a lot of what I do, is really building my relationships with senators. So again, courtesy, you're going to call once you're nominated, you're going to fill out that questionnaire. You're going to call your home county senators and you're going to say, I've been nominated for this position on this board. I would love to discuss with you my qualifications. please give me a call at your convenience. Also, at the same time, you might want to reach out to the Senate Judiciary Chairman. Currently, the Senate Judiciary Chairman is Senator Scutari. Starting in late January in the new term, it will be Senator Stack, as Senator Scutari is going to be the Senate President. So you'll reach out to, we're going to just say it's Senator Scutari for right now. You'd reach out to Senator Scutari and have a very similar conversation that you had with your home senators. You know, that you've been nominated for this position, that you would love the opportunity to have him learn more about you and discuss your qualifications. So here's, I'm going to pause to also bring back to the protocol and procedure, because we do hear with the advice and consent process that it does take quite a bit of time, which it does. Part of the reason for that is not just the Senate's fault. It's shared by both of us. And I don't know if I would say fault, but again, it's procedure. Typically, when we're moving advice and consent positions, we like to do so as a package. All right. So what that means is, for instance, there is a dietetics and nutrition board. I know this because I was working on it earlier, but we have 5 or 6 people on that board that we need to move. We are not just going to piecemeal one at a time. It's not helpful for the boards to continually be onboarding people and re-explaining information. So if we are going to change a board, we're going to move it as a package. It's the same thing we do with our judicial packages. So what that means is, now I know everybody on this Zoom, the minute I send you a questionnaire, you're going to send it right back completely filled out. But then there's me over here with, you know, I'm a single mom, a dog, a kid, life, a job, all of this might take me a little bit longer to fill it out. Well, I need to wait. I guess I have to remove myself. My team has to wait until that questionnaire comes back before we can do the vetting process, right? And because of that, it's going to push everybody back. Now, sometimes we'll get to a vetting process where, you know, 4 out of 5 of our candidates are complete, and that 5th candidate is not qualified, which means we have to start brand new at the beginning of the process with somebody new, and that can add to the time. So that's one hurdle. But now let's say we've got our group of 5, we've nominated them. They have all called their senators. They all have their sign off, because again, they're not going to move as a package to the Senate Judiciary until every single person has their questionnaire and their sign off. And actually, Patricia, because of the Commission on the Status of Women, you know this, because everyone was kind of brought on together, but then we kind of did it piecemeal. And because of that, there are problems within the commission itself. So I'm using Patricia as an example of why typically we do not do this. And also it ends up taking more time, mainly because also senators, they have a lot on their plate, right? We have a part-time legislature. I think it's really important to mention that. So these are individuals who have a full-time job, most of them, and they're also giving their time as a senator. Sometimes them seeing things again, they're like, wait a minute, didn't we just do this? And they might not feel the urgency to sign off or to bring it forward. So again, I'm just talking about hurdles and challenges that potentially face the advice and consent process. But we are now in the hypothetical brilliant situation where everyone has submitted their questionnaires on the judicial side. Everybody has gotten their sign off. Awesome. Well, one of 2 things are going to happen. The position is either testifiable or it's not. If it's not, the Senate Judiciary will just bring it on in. They'll call it up. The committee will vote on it. You won't have to attend. They'll release the names. The Senate will confirm. And the Senate Judiciary Chairman and the Senate President work collaboratively, because we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where the Judiciary has released names, yet the Senate won't confirm that. I haven't seen it happen. Again, I've only been in this job for 8 months, but I also have not heard of a time when that has happened. They're very much in lockstep. So this is also to say, sometimes you won't have to testify. Many of them are testifiable positions. Well, what does that mean? Okay, for those of us who are not so great at public speaking or have maybe some anxiety, fair, what it is, I'm going to break it down for you. It's 3 minutes. 3. 3 minutes where you will thank your home county senators, you will thank the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and you will thank the Judicial Committee for letting you testify for your qualifications. You are then going to thank anybody who ever got you to the point that brought you before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And then you're going to give a brief statement about why your qualifications will help the board or commission that you wish to serve on. Then the board will vote on the releasing of your name. Usually it goes by very easily where they just say yay and you're released. Sometimes, especially if the senator knows you, has something positive that they would like to have on public record, they will share those sentiments at that time. The chairman will call for a roll call. They will vote and release your name, and then the Senate will confirm it. Typically, Senate Judiciary is at 11, Senate will confirm at 1 o'clock, and ta-da, you are now on a board or commission. And the same end as I mentioned earlier, where I will send you a letter, you will get the oath of office, you'll sign that, notarize it, send it back to the Secretary of State, and concurrently we will send a letter to the board. That all happens. So that is the advice and consent process in a nutshell. I'm thinking if I missed anything. It is complex. It does take time. I would say it's worth it because there are incredible boards and commissions that are advice and consent. But I think that's it for me. Patricia, I know I saw some questions pop up. I do want to be clear that I very much want to answer your questions, but to be considerate of everybody's time and to not also get into the weeds. If you have questions about policy or procedure, that's great. If we're going to talk about individual boards, it just gets a little too complicated. So we're going to stick to policy and procedure. Also, I talk way too much with my hands because my Fitbit just told me I hit 10,000 steps and I haven't moved in an hour. So there we have it.
Let me bring Ferlanda and I back. Oh, no, I lost Sam. See, I'm like, really, here we go. All right. So we have a couple questions in the chat box. And I think this is a really great one. How do you know which boards are advice and consent? Like, how do you differentiate that? Is that on the website?
It's on the website. Yep, it's right on the website if it's a direct appointment or if it's advice and consent. And the other thing I do want to mention here that I actually forgot to mention earlier is there are certain boards that have Senate president recommendations and Assembly speaker recommendations. So the other thing here is if you have a good relationship with the Senate president or the Assembly speaker, I would have a conversation with them to see if they have a vacancy, if you could fill that spot. Because very often what will happen is the governor gets picked, the Senate president gets picked, the speaker gets picked. If the Senate president or the speaker makes a recommendation on who those picks are, we typically go along with them, unless there is a glaring issue for why we should not.
Yeah. And then another question, and I think this is a great one as well. Sam, you mentioned that in particular, you are interested in your office under your leadership is interested in screening applicants to ensure that there is diverse representation. Can you talk a little bit about what are those identification factors that are on that application? If it's not just race or gender identity, what else is there?
Okay, so it's race, it's ethnicity, it's sex, it's gender identity, sexual orientation, veteran status, or military status, I should say, identifying as a person with a disability or a caretaker of a person with a disability. We get the geographic diversity from the first page where we see where the person is from.
Perfect. Earlier, when we had our call this morning, Ferlanda, you asked some really great questions that I'd love for you to bring into this conversation. And then I'll try to recall some of the questions that some of our morning participants asked, because I thought they were really helpful and could be helpful for our evening participants as well. Ferlanda, do you want to take it over for a couple minutes?
Sure. So the question that I had this morning was, what I like about this webinar is I think it really makes the process very user-friendly, right? And so everyone that's in this webinar really should submit a resume and just get the ball rolling. And then my question was, so now you have a diverse pool of applicants, what is in place on the selection side so that we don't kind of run into a roadblock where, yes, there's a bevy of, blessings on the pool side, but then who actually gets plucked out and selected, there may be a bottleneck there.
So I think there are a couple of things here. One is, it would be ignorant to say that there's not a benefit to having me in this position, right? Because I am so passionate about DEIB. But I also think, and because it's personal to me, I mentioned this earlier, but it's not just about, being a good human, which I think I am, but I also have a biracial daughter. And I bring that up to say it's personal to me to make sure that as she grows up, she sees herself represented in the room, especially with government, especially with politics, especially when it has been access has been so limited in our Black and Brown communities, especially in our AAPI communities. I really want to make sure that we're increasing our access, right? So that this isn't an issue moving forward. I also think that it is my responsibility as, a queer white woman to recognize my privilege in the room and make sure that, it's just my personal belief. I don't need to be the voice in the room. There are so many valid, experienced voices that I'm so grateful that I get to curate, right? That I literally, the way I think about boards and commissions is curating the best dinner party that I can think of. And it's true. And so I think for the bottlenecking, I have set policy and procedures that, and I have to be very clear, I'm also really lucky that I'm backed by this administration, specifically this governor, because I wouldn't be able to have the tough conversations that I have sometimes with some of our senators or even some of our departments where I get lists for boards and commissions that are all, middle-aged white men. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with middle-aged white men, but we don't need a slate of 12, And so I get to say, like, here, this isn't up to snuff. Like, I need something different. And when they tell me, like, oh no, these are who the candidates are, I say, there's nobody else. I say, okay. And that's when I go to work, and I utilize my advocacy backgrounds as well as my networks to find the folks. And and this, I'm going to speak about a situation that just popped up with DEP, and this isn't a knock on DEP. I think they do incredible work, but there is in the environment is a very nuanced community. And for anyone to say, especially anyone who wants to talk about environmental justice, to say that there aren't Black and Brown voices in the environment would be arrogant. You just need to know where to look. And very often I'm willing to do the work that I need to do to make sure that that happens. And my team knows that they're going to be doing the work. I think it's also really helpful to have, the Department of Outreach, where I get to go to them and work with that deputy chief, Deb Cuernavaca, and talk with her stakeholders. So it is partially absolutely because I'm in this position. And I also will make sure that, I plan on staying here forever because I love it, but whoever my predecessor is will know, or my successor is, I should say, will know that this is how we do things. And it should become the procedure moving forward.
Very good, thank you.
Oh, the other thing I will say, because I just remembered this, we talk also, I think this is important to point out when we're talking about bottlenecking, because I think we also have plenty of diverse candidates that are nominated for certain positions. And I think it would be important for folks to look at the gender and equity at our state house and in our legislature, and then question, maybe rhetorically question, why don't we have more diverse voices, right? Look who your gatekeepers are. And I'm not even being dismissive of them, because there are many folks who do move very diverse candidates, but there are some counties that are harder to get diverse voices through.
Great.
Thank you. I agreed, right? This is like a whole this is like civic engagement, right?
Yes.
That civic engagement is lots of things. And it's not, we often think about civic engagement about voting. And this is another one of those things of like elections have consequences. One of the comments in the chat box sort of asked about, like, if you get appointed to a board or a commission, like how frequently do you meet? And I feel like I can speak to that. I've had the privilege of being appointed through various capacities. I was the co-chair of the Governor's Advisory Council Against Sexual Violence in my previous position. Before coming to the state chamber, I was the executive director for the New Jersey Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And that was an advise and consent process, which, truth be told, is complicated because the statute or the directive that created that council requires that the executive director of the coalition serve on the council. And so the timing and the delays for the advice and consent process sometimes make it very hard for well-intentioned councils or commissions to sort of live up to their very operational parameters. And then the challenge was also then serving, finally, once I was officially appointed, serving as the co-chair of the council. It was incredibly challenging to make sure that we were keeping up with the mandates. If you look through some of the descriptions of the councils or commissions on the website, you'll see some are very specific. And truth be told, I've written legislation that has very specific parameters about who needs to be a part of a council. I want to make sure I've got 3 trauma-informed clinicians. I want to make sure I've got 3 culturally specific service providers. I want to make sure all of these things. But then when someone leaves their position for a new job, or someone moves the state, or someone just simply says, I have to tap out, I've been doing this for too long, filling those holes is incredibly hard when there are, sort of bureaucratic processes in place. And also, though, to answer the question, which I originally posed and then I didn't answer it, was the boards and commissions meet with different levels of frequency based off of sort of the need, but also in a lot of cases, the group determines the frequency with which they meet. So I've recently been appointed to serve on the Office of Corrections, Office of the Ombudsman Advisory Board. And as you all probably know, the issue of ensuring dignity of incarcerated individuals is incredibly urgent. You don't need to, there's just a new news report out today about a horrific accident that happened in one of our county jails. And so that board, we meet every 2 weeks and we take that very seriously. It is on our calendars and we meet every 2 weeks to figure out what next steps do we have to employ to ensure that the state is compliant with the parameters of the Dignity Act. But the Governor's Advisory Council meets quarterly. There was a great question in there about whether or not you meet in person or by Zoom. My experience pre-pandemic was that most of these groups liked to meet in person, which quite honestly made them less accessible. The attendance was poor, the engagement was limited. You often had people trying to call in, they're trying to get to Lawrenceville from Teaneck at 5 o'clock on a Thursday. God help anybody for signing up for that. And so I think there's, when we talk about what's happened on the other side of the pandemic, or we're not even on the other side now, but from the pandemic, we are learning that the ability to meet remotely makes us more accessible, cover some of those transportation or geographical barriers that Sam was talking about. It's sometimes really challenging for our colleagues in the southern part of the state to be involved in these types of commissions or opportunities because the public transportation infrastructure isn't so great. And it's often that we find representation from like New Brunswick North is most plentiful. So I share all of that just as a little bit of like personal experience, but also it is complicated and it does require, I think, someone like Sam and your colleagues to continuously sort of hold everyone collectively accountable, because there are boards and commissions that are written into pieces of legislation with very good intentions to sort of hold people accountable to live up to the standards of that piece of legislation. And when it's an advise and consent process, it's really challenging to live up to those parameters because the process is complicated.
Right.
Sorry, I talked a lot.
No, and I think like that's part of the issue. I think also people are afraid what they don't know, and people don't like being bad at things, right? So I think that is that barrier, right? People will sometimes get turned off by the fact that there are so many barriers, but we don't want you to. Currently, right now, I am having conversations with senior staff about making sure that we can keep Zoom, because especially in our medical fields, the caliber of doctors that we're looking at, it's hard for them, you know, while they're currently serving in their field, to be on boards like this because it takes time away from their patients. So I think that there are a couple of things I do want to hit on that I'm thinking about from this morning. One is how long are terms? A lot of the boards that meet, the term actually follows the board seat, not the person. So for instance, if I was appointed for 5 years on a board, right, in a 5-year term, but then I resigned, and then we didn't appoint somebody until 3 years later, their term would be 2 years. So that's the first thing. Second thing is the only way you come off a board is if we replace you, if you resign, or if you unfortunately shift your mortal coil. That is really, it's a better way of saying die, I feel like, shift the mortal coil. I was talking about that after our conversation because I was like, it's really kind of morbid just to be like, or if you die, which is true. Sometimes also we will leave people on holdover for years because, as we all know, the political environment landscape shifts. And so at the time in which you were appointed, it would have been easy. It was easier for you to get through advice and consent. Maybe there is a roadblock preventing you from getting there now. Other points that I want to hit on is it does not matter if you are Republican or Democrat or independent. We want all of them, all of you. We all, like, I always say that I'm in like the, best position because I get to work with everybody, you know, and it is about collaboration. It is about partnership in its true form. I have to have very tough conversations with Democrats. I have to have very tough conversations with Republicans because at the end of the day, they have to be reminded that their job is to serve their constituents, you know, and that there are really wonderful constituents that we would love to serve on these boards. I'm trying to think of like some of the questions from this morning that were.
Well, there are two questions that I think I can quickly crystallize. So while we're talking about appointments on boards, there is a question about what's the process for creating new boards.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and then the other one is there a handout, a cheat sheet for people to refer to?
No, but there should be. I've actually, okay, I will be honest, I've been trying to work on one and I apologize, it's lame duck. Like after the election, lame duck, it's just, it's a little busy over here. I am working on getting one together. I've actually had this request from a couple of departments, so it is on my to-do list, which means it will happen. So that's the first thing. There is not a cheat sheet, but I'm working on it. The other question, oh gosh, what was the other question? Oh,
creating
a board. Okay, so so this is fun because the two ways a board or commission is developed is either legislatively, right? So through statute, which I would actually say is the best way to create a board or commission. Which means you would have to talk to a senator that you have a good relationship with or assembly person, and they would sponsor legislation to create that board. The other way is through executive order. Typically, if you're an outsider to the administration, it's not like the probability declines. I actually had this really unique opportunity. So we just actually passed the AAPI commission. Governor signed off on it a couple of weeks ago, and I wrote that legislation because yes, there had been something previously that we really needed to expand upon. And Patricia, as you had mentioned, you know, you wanted to make sure that you had this and you had this. And I really worked with our outreach, our Department of Outreach, to talk about, you know, what communities did we really need to focus on and how were we going to make sure that we do that. So we're currently in the process of vetting that commission. But that went through the legislature. So I worked with Senator Gopal and Assemblyman Mukherjee. And they were incredible in sponsoring that legislation, and we were able to get it through. So those are the two ways to create a board or a commission. I would always recommend to create a statute legislatively because a new governor could come in and eliminate the executive order and terminate it. That's such a good question. I love it.
I'm sorry if I missed something. Someone did ask and I answered, but let's make sure, Sam, that I answered correctly. does the list indicate whether or not there are any openings? And I said yes, but the data is sometimes outdated. So
Yes.
if you see a board you'd like to be considered for, and then you don't see a vacancy listed, feel free to email the appointments office just to make sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, or just, what I always recommend is in the questionnaire, you can put which ones, you don't have to fill out a new questionnaire for every single commission or board. So what I like to say is choose your top 5, right? So if that first one is one that you're not sure that there's a vacancy, indicate that that's number 1, and then just put in parentheses, unsure of vacancy.
And I have a question, because I was going to ask that question. I can't believe we didn't ask it this morning. But so if you get a not qualified, like what's the time frame for you to reapply? Are you forever barred? Like what is, can you talk a little bit?
I would
about
not
that?
say forever barred. What I would say is, I would never say forever barred. What I would say is there are if you're, I'm trying to diplomatically figure out how to say what I want to say. Which Patricia, when she talked earlier about not giving all my secrets away or sharing the times that there are some times where I'm not as diplomatic, allegedly. If your vision of the world is not similar to the governor's vision of the state, that's okay, right? Like we're Democrats. If you're a Republican, that's okay. But if it comes to a point where you are any of the isms or the obics, right? Like transphobic, homophobic, misogynistic, if there are those things, I'm sorry, but your values are not aligned with our administration, and more than likely that is a stop for me. There have been a true story, and I will not use any qualifiers, but there was a senator who wanted to get their best friend through. And unfortunately, this best friend had publicly said some very transphobic hate rhetoric, and that was a non-starter for me. And this senator happens to be close with the governor. And so when the governor tried to advocate on behalf of their friend, I made it very clear that we had a conversation where I said, sir, like, this is what happened. And as soon as the governor heard that, he said, you're absolutely right in your findings, and I completely understand. So when I talk earlier about it's very specific to this administration, I'm very lucky that I get to work with this administration who stick by their values. And if you are not morally aligned with us, more than likely it's not going to move during this administration. So when I say not barred, I mean, try again in another administration. Perhaps they have different values, but I can say, while I'm around, not going to move.
Okay, that's a great answer. Thank you.
Of course.
All right, Sam, Ferlanda, is there anything else that you want to bring into the room before we let everyone cozy up for the evening?
So, I mean, I'm sure, Patricia, you were going to say this in your closing, but we're recording both sessions, and the questions, although we tried to remember the ones from earlier today, you may have to watch 2 hours of this.
Or email appointments@nj.gov, or you can also email Patricia, and Patricia can send me a list of questions, and I'll be more than happy to follow up with answers. The other thing, Diane, I saw you just asked, where's the application? So the application, once you submit a resume, we'll send you the questionnaire. Application and questionnaire are kind of interchangeable. That's the application or questionnaire. But I also just want to thank both of you for inviting me on to chat with your folks about the appointments process. Thank you for helping me, kind of really practice what we preach, which is, making sure that we're doing the education piece, increasing access. So I very much appreciate both of you, and thank you again for inviting me tonight.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Ferlanda, and thank all of you for being here. There's one more question. Where do we send the resumes? You send your resume to
appointments@nj.gov. Yeah.
I also will send a follow-up email to everyone, which will include the link to the sessions. It'll have all of the website information as well as that email link. And you should have everything you need from there. I also
I'm going to interrupt for a hot second. I do need to go grab my daughter who is across the street at her neighbor's. So I know that you have some things that you want to talk about with your folks. So I'm going to hop off so that I can go grab her because it is almost bedtime. Thank you guys again. Have a good night.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Of course.
So just really fast, if you are interested in continuing these conversations around board diversity, big B board, meaning all different kinds of boards, and big D, all kinds of different types of diversity, I hope that you'll join us on Friday, December 17th at 9 a.m. We're facilitating a conversation with the Center for Nonprofits and some nonprofit sector colleagues talking about board diversity in the nonprofit sector, as well as what we hope our corporate colleagues can bring to the table if they do consider joining a nonprofit board. So I'll send the registration link for that conversation as well, and a follow-up email. Ferlanda, thank you for being an awesome colleague and friend. I'm so thankful that I get to do this with you. Thank you for those of you that hung on the line a little longer than we anticipated. We're so thankful for your engagement and for your interest in this. I think that collectively we have a real opportunity here to change the game when it comes to diverse representation on New Jersey state boards and commissions. And I look forward to seeing all of you soar. Take good care of yourselves. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.